Spoštovane gledalke, spoštovani gledalci, lepo pozdravljeni v podcastu Vroča tema na spletnem portalu domovina.je. Nocoj v podcastu gostimo uglednega avtorja, pisatelja Alejandra Peno Escluso, avtorja priznanih knjižnih uspešnic iz serije Forum Sao Paulo, Kulturna, vojna ter Volilne, prevare. Predgovor k njegovi tretji knjigi je spisal predsednik SDS Janez Janša, sicer pa Alejandro Esclusa, venezuelski disident, politik in pisatelj, sicer diplomiran iz strojništva. V politiko v svoji karieri vstopa že davnega leta 1984, ko je ustanovil laboristično stranko. Je pa ta od začetka nasprotovala marksizmu, političnemu nasilju in trgovini z mamili. Čaveza pa je že od samega začetka razglašal za Castro marioneto, torej človeka tesno povezanega z režimom Fidela Castra. Escluso je komunistična oblast dvakrat aretirala zaradi podpore terorizmu, čeprav je vse življenje zavračal in obsojal terorizem. No, je pa ustanovil tudi organizacijo UNO Amerika in postal njen predsednik, konfederacija nevladnih organizacij pravzaprav, ki si prizadeva za boj proti latinsko-ameriškim levim strankam. O tem in še več bomo seveda danes govorili v tem podcastu. Tokrat je gost Grand Plaza hotela v Ljubljani, mednarodne konference z naslovom Demokracija in tehnologija, ki jo organizira Inštitut doktorja Jožeta Pučnika v sodelovanju z Slovensko demokratsko stranko. Konferenca pa se osredotoča na ključne izzive in priložnosti, ki jih sodobne tehnologije prinašajo demokratičnim procesom. So welcome to the Wina studio, Mr. Alejandro Pena Esclusa. A warm welcome here. I assume you're here at the invitation of your friend, probably Janez Janša, since this is not your first visit to Slovenia. What do you plan to address at your speech at the conference?
Well, I'm happy to be here in Slovenia, a place that I like a lot, and I'm very well treated here. Yes, I'm a friend of Janez Janša, and I hope he becomes the new prime minister this few months, because I'm sure he'll do a good job. What I want to explain in the conference in the Grand Plaza Hotel is the methods developed by the Venezuelan dictatorship to commit fraud. Part of this is already written in my book, published in Slovenian, the electoral frauds of the Sao Paulo Forum, Volilne, prevare, Forum Sao Paulo, that has been published in Slovenia. But since I wrote the book, there are new developments. For example, new information has come out about how Venezuelan method is being exported to commit fraud in 70 nations. This has already been investigated and published. I will speak about that and other things.
Your best-selling Forum of Sao Paulo consists of 3 books, I think.
Yes.
And you argue that Forum Sao Paulo operates as a transnational political network, as you said. The network was founded in 1990. But the rise of the left-wing ideologies in the second half of the 20th century began much earlier. So my question is, would you say these ideas advanced through a long march through the institutions and through cultural wars?
Yeah, because when the Sao Paulo Forum was founded in July 1990, the Berlin Wall had just fell 6 months earlier. Mm-hmm. So the left couldn't speak anymore about abolishing private property or state capitalism or class struggle. That was outdated because it failed in the Soviet Union. So what they did is that they embraced the ideas of the Italian founder of the Communist Party, Antonio Gramsci, who said in many books, translated in many languages, including Slovenian, Antonio Gramsci, that the secret to obtain power was not weapons, was not politics, it was culture. But if you, he said, if you could convince people through culture of the convenience of Marxism, if you, let's say, wash the brains of the population, then it's much easier to take control. So he developed those projects those methods, and I explain those in my books about the cultural warfare of the Sao Paulo Forum. It's all there in the book.
You say that America, especially Latin America, has become some kind of laboratory exploring left-wing ideology and then somehow express it and share it to the other parts of the world, especially in the United States and Europe. So why, in your view, was Latin America the test ground for left ideologies?
Good question. The first laboratory was Venezuela. Cuba was the brain, Venezuela was the muscle, because it had oil, that is money to export, and then it expanded throughout Latin America. These experiments from Latin America were exported to other countries, including Slovenia, because there's a political party here in Slovenia that was founded and promoted by Venezuela. So that's an example.
They denied that many times.
Yeah, but they're very much related to Venezuela. The same thing in Spain with the party Podemos. But why, to answer your question, why Latin America? Because Latin America, it's a ground, it's an open scenario. There are not so many controls, so they could do many things without the interference of the state. So since there are leftist groups in Latin America, they all got together after the fall of the Berlin Wall to make a regional structure, create new methods of control coming from Cuba, developing in Venezuela, and growing in the rest of the continent. And from there, once they proved them and the experiments proved right, they were efficient, they say, well, let's export this to the rest of the world. One more thing. One of the instruments of this export method was an organization created by the Democratic Party in the United States. It's called the International Progressive. It was created by a Democratic senator. His name is Bernie Sanders. And the International Progressive is a combination of Latin American left, North American left, European left, and Asian and African left. It works in the 5 continents and is a growing development of the Sao Paulo Forum with the help of sectors of the United States.
The United States has a long tradition of involving in internal policies of Latin American countries. It helped topple several presidents, and some interventions were followed by military dictatorships, such as the juntas in Argentina, Pinochet in Chile. So my question is, does the United States foreign policy also bear some responsibility for the later way of socialism in Latin America?
Well, when we speak about the United States, it is true. They had intervened in my continent in the past, sometimes in a very unfortunate way. But we cannot speak of a single homogeneous United States. There's not one United States. There are different factions. So when a wrong faction, or let's say mistaken faction, takes power, like in the case of Barack Obama, or in the case of Joe Biden, they exert a lot of damage to Latin America. And when there is a good faction, let's say in this case Donald Trump, they are beneficial to Latin America. This, what Donald Trump did, to go and capture Nicolás Maduro, is the best thing that could have happened in Venezuela. Because this guy was the head of the most powerful drug cartel, the cartel of the Suns, and he was destroying my country.
We'll get to that. How do you remember your childhood in Venezuela? That's something probably our viewers would like to know. After oil was discovered, I think in 1920s, American companies built major infrastructure in your country. For decades, oil prices were high, and by the 1970s, things began to change a little bit. By the late 80s, Venezuela was already in serious trouble because it had not developed other industries. Here's my provocative question. Do you accept that Venezuela's problems started much earlier before Chavismo?
Oh yes, yes. The Chavismo was the consequence of bad governments that didn't use the oil to the benefit of the population, although they were much better governments than Chavez. And let me tell you something, this not only happened in Venezuela, because other Chavez-type governments also took power in Colombia or in Mexico or in Argentina or Chile. But yes, Venezuela in my childhood was a wonderful country. You could develop, you could study.
Wealthy country.
Yeah, but it was probably the most wealthy country in Latin America when I was young, let's say when I was 20 or 30. Then I didn't dedicate myself to politics. I used to have my own enterprise, my own company, and it came out very good. Now, some corruption and some mismanagement of government created the condition for someone like Chavez to criticize the system. He was lying because he was not trying to solve the problems of that system. He was attacking the system in order to obtain power and then destroy even more our country. But it would have been better if he didn't showed up, and that those governments that had these mistakes would somehow solve or react to their own problems and change the situation themselves.
Because opinions differ, who is guilty for the situation in Venezuela? The leftist parties have their own opinion. When President Carlos Andrés Pérez returned to power and introduced austerity instead of populist social spending like he did in the 70s during his first mandate, a society used to privileges somehow rebelled. The Caracazo happened.
Yes.
The crackdown was brutal. Many believe more than 5,000 people were brutally killed. Do you think this event paved the way for Hugo Chavez?
Well, this is what I was trying to say earlier. What Carlos Andrés Pérez was trying to do in his second mandate was to correct the mistakes of our democracy. That is, our democracy could have been corrected without having to come in a situation like Chavez created, which is a regime puppet of the Cubans. Now, in the Caracazo that you rightly mentioned, there were not 5,000 people killed. There were people killed, but this is an exaggeration of the left. And the left had to do by promoting the Caracazo as a tool to destroy democracy. That is, of course, people did react because of the austerity program, but what the leftists was augmented, multiplied the effect of the austerity in order to create turmoil, crisis, and to be able to overthrow the democracy in Venezuela.
Let's talk a little bit more about Hugo Chavez. In the 90s, you became one of his loudest critics.
Yes.
And you linked him to the Cuban regime.
Yes.
Can you explain this link? When did it happen?
Well, let me start by saying something that happened a few days ago to answer your question. The 3rd of January, when the American armed forces came in Venezuela and captured Maduro, they killed all 32 of his bodyguards. What nationality were them?
They were Cuban. Yeah.
Cubans. Can you imagine that an acting president of one country has bodyguards of another country? That is a demonstration that Nicolas Maduro now and Hugo Chavez first, they've always been puppets of the of the Cuban regime. How this started? Well, this started with a brother of Hugo Chavez, Adan Chavez, who was older than Chavez. He was related to the Cuban regime. When Chavez attempted 2 coups d'etat in 1992.
Yeah, he tried to take power by force, right?
Yes, I was there, I lived that, He did one coup in February of 1902 and then another one in November. He failed. He went to jail. But then when he was, pardoned and he got out of jail in December of 1994, the first thing he did was to go to La Habana, to Cuba, and to meet with Fidel Castro, and to say publicly to Fidel Castro that Fidel Castro was his model to follow. Then a few months later, he went to Montevideo, Uruguay. I'm talking about May 1995. And he inscribed himself in the Sao Paulo Forum, an organization that was created by Fidel Castro and Lula da Silva. And from that very moment, Chavez became a puppet of Cuba and also of the Colombian narco-guerrillas. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing today with the Cartel of the Suns and drug trafficking began in 1995 with the relation of Chavez and the Colombian drug trafficking guerrillas.
In 1998, you tried to stop him by running against him in the presidential elections, but he was sort of convincing. He won the elections.
Well, this is a lecture that, or a lesson that should be learned in other countries, including Slovenia. Why did Hugo Chavez won, even though he had attempted two coups d'etat? He was working for the Cuban. He won because of his discourse destroying the system, the democracy. He said, this is all bad. He said only bad things of the system. And he represented himself as the change, as the future. He lied. He said, I'm a military, I mean order, I mean the rule of law. This is all false. He represented the interests of Cuba. So elections can be won by lying and by the use of huge amount of money for propaganda. Mm-hmm. And he did have a lot of money, international. Mm-hmm. So he cheated and he fooled the Venezuelan population.
But in 2002, there was a coup attempt against Chavez, and he was removed from power for, I think, 1 day or maybe a little more, and then he was restored by military. And there were rumors that the United States were involved. I think you were also suspected to be involved in this case. What happened?
Well, actually, there was never a coup. Now there is this narrative that it was a coup. What happened was this. Around 1 million people went to the palace of government, El Palacio de Miraflores, the Miraflores Palace, to ask Chavez for his resignation because he, in that time, he was already beginning to destroy the country. So when this 1 million people arrived, they didn't have arms. So Chavez ordered some of his thugs to start firing bullets against the population. Many of them died. Others were wounded. So people started to run and the protest, the manifestation dissolved. But the military in charge in that moment said, we cannot follow orders to kill innocent people without arms. So they somehow disavowed or decided not to follow Chavez's order anymore. So he was taken out of power, or I must say, he wrote in a paper that he did renounce. He renounced. It wasn't a coup. But since the opposition didn't get together to form a government in a way that everybody supported, he returned and said, oh, I was victim of a coup. And since then, we talk about a coup, but it wasn't a coup. It was a massacre committed. And Hugo Chavez blamed me and others, enemies of him, of participating in this coup. Mm-hmm. So I had to support legal problems for many years because of that.
Let's talk about Chavez's interference in national oil company. Donald Trump says Hugo Chavez seized American private property. Chavez actually nationalized infrastructure, and Trump says property was stolen from the United States. Is Trump right?
Yes and no. in terms of the interpretation of what happened. The nationalization of the oil company in Venezuela was not Chavez doing. This was done much before Chavez. And it was done in a legal way, and it was done in accordance to the United States. There's no question of that. But when Chavez was in power, he confiscated some oil fields and some structures of American oil companies. This was stolen property. And this is what Trump refers to. And in this case, he is right. Not only that, let me tell you that the oil company was used by Chavez and then by Maduro to launder drug money. So since then, the oil company has been destroyed because it's not being used to develop the oil, but to launder drug money. And now our oil industry is totally destroyed.
Mm-hmm. How big of a culprit is the United States because of their measures against Venezuela?
How would you repeat, please?
Yes, so the sanctions put against Venezuela by the United States. Is the United States a culprit for a Venezuelan economic situation?
I would say that the most important sanction we had was the Chavez government itself, because he didn't American sanctions to destroy the country. He was destroying it because socialism destroys. He confiscated, he destroyed the private property, and he started to commit crimes. So when he acted this way, he began the destruction of Venezuela. The sanctions of the United States came in later, after the destruction was very well advanced.
Mm-hmm. So Venezuela urgently needs investment. Was what Trump did the only solution, so changing regime the way he did it? Was there any other solution to put Maduro out of power?
No, we tried everything. We tried elections and he stole them. We tried dialogue and he would cheat. We tried peaceful demonstration and he would repress them. We tried intermediate actions of other countries and that failed. We must understand that Maduro is the head of a criminal organization, and the only language a criminal organization understands is the use of force. So Trump did the only correct thing to do, is the use of force to capture an indicted element, a criminal, and to make sure that creates a transition in Venezuela.
Yeah, it's interesting that media noticed that indictment against Maduro was revised. If I understood correctly, he's no longer accused of being the boss of the Cartel de los Soles as a concrete organized cartel, but rather describes now as a loser network. Maduro remains accused, of course, of terrorism and drug trafficking, but still, can you explain what changed?
Yeah, let me tell you that the Cartel of the Suns, Cartel de los Soles, it does exist. It's the most powerful cartel in the Western Hemisphere because it's responsible for distributing 20% of the cocaine that is consumed in the Western Hemisphere, including here in the streets of Slovenia. But to prove that in a court is more difficult. So the attorneys, the Attorney General, and they decided to take that out and just concentrate in the proofs they do have about the relation of Maduro with drug money. They have a lot of elements for convicted him. But to demonstrate the existence of the Cartel of the Suns is more difficult because a criminal organization does not write, let's say, a paper saying we were founded in this year. It's not something formal. It's informal, but it does exist. So they decided to go with the proofs that they have.
On the day of your arrival in Slovenia on Thursday, there was a protest for Venezuela against the US, in front of US embassy in Ljubljana. It was organized by social student group Iskra connected to Levica Youth, Izquierda. But in the background, there was also Miha Kordiš, a former parliamentarian of Levica, who once attended Maduro's inauguration and reportedly flew from Madrid to Caracas on a government plane. How bizarre is that leftist protest against Maduro removal while Venezuelans around the world are cheering, are going to the streets and celebrating?
Well, I assure you something, in that protest, surely there was not one Venezuelan. Maybe there were some from the Venezuelan embassy in Ljubljana, but that's it. So those people who protest against the capture of Maduro, they're not Venezuelans, because this is the truth. In other protests in other parts of the world.
There were also the protests against Maduro removal in New York, I think in Madrid.
Yeah. This was all coordinated by the international left. They are very sad that they're not going to receive any more money from the Venezuelan regime. They don't know what they're talking about. They've never said anything. Those people protesting in front of the American embassy never said anything about the violation of human rights in Venezuela. There are more than 1,000 political prisoners. There's this catastrophe, humanitarian catastrophe. They don't care about that. They all care is to defend their banners, their leftist banners. So those are not credible protests. They're promoted by the international left, and they don't have anything to do with the benefit of the Venezuelan population.
Your compatriot, Venezuelan Manuel Jacobo Contreras, which we hosted just a couple of days ago here in this studio, he said that leftists should come and try to live themselves in Venezuela. What would be your message to them?
Well, I think he's right. I think if you tasted the Venezuelan socialist regime for just a couple of weeks, you would run. You'd be in horror, run, because the destruction has been so terrible, and the feeling of terror. Mm-hmm. I would compare that as the Slovenian people when they were dominated by the Soviets. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing, but besides that, there is criminality. So it's a terrible situation in my country, and we need a change, and that is why we're so happy that Donald Trump intervened and captured Maduro, because this is the beginning of the end.
Let's talk about the latest stolen elections in Venezuela in 2024. You wrote about this. You said that Venezuelan opposition proved that Maduro was cheating.
Yes.
How?
Well, the Venezuelan opposition, led by Maria Corina Machado, ran something that I would recommend be done in other countries. A parallel system. That was the National Electoral Authorities, the name is Consejo Nacional Electoral, the council, and Maria Corina run a duplicate, a parallel system. So she obtained with her team more than 600,000 Venezuelans in all the voting centers, the tally sheets. So those were copied, scanned, and they were put in the cloud, in the internet, with the help of Elon Musk, with the technology of Elon Musk. Mm-hmm. So anybody in Venezuela or in the world, or here in Slovenia, could see not only the results, but the actual pictures scanned of every tally sheet. Not every, 85%. She was able to prove that Edmundo González Urrutia, the president-elect, won with more than 40 points over Nicolás Maduro. But he didn't care. He robbed the elections. He stayed in power, and he started to persecute anyone who would say the opposite.
Mm-hmm. What should happen now in Venezuela? How do you interpret Donald Trump's statement about Corina Machado? Because he said he somehow does not trust she's able to take power in Venezuela.
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I want to congratulate you, because in the questions that you've asked to me, I can see that you're very well informed of the history of Venezuela, of the certain things that have happened in certain days. So congratulations.
Thank you. Gracias.
And I would say I need some time to answer this question. What we have in Venezuela is not a government. It's a criminal organization running a country. All the institutions of the state, that is, oil company, the foreign ministry, the armed forces, the communication ministry, the security forces, all serves the purpose of promoting the distribution of drugs. And Venezuela, it's also a hub, a platform for the enemies of the Western Hemisphere, extracontinental powers, China, Russia, Iran, Islamic terrorist groups. They all work together in Venezuela. Drugs, terrorism, and the enemies of Western Hemisphere. This explains why a country like ours, which is not powerful, we don't have nuclear weapons, we don't have a powerful army, and yet we were surrounded by the most powerful flotilla in the recent history of Latin America. Why? Because the combination of all of these things. All right. Maduro has been captured, but the structure of the regime is still there. If Maria Corina Machado or myself, if we go in Venezuela now, we would probably go to jail or worse. The structure of criminality must be first dismantled. And this is what Donald Trump is trying to do.
Is he? Because Delcy Rodriguez is in power and she's close ally of Maduro and even before Chavez.
Yes, she's a criminal. She cannot be trusted. She's indicted as well, even though it's not public, but she's indicted in the United States. She cannot be trusted at all. But here's the thing. Trump ordered her with the missiles supporting him and the aircraft carrier and a nuclear submarine and the F-35s. She instructed her to dismantle the cartel of the Suns and to hand in power. That is, what we're seeing here is a surrendering process. And Trump decided to name her in charge of dismantling the cartel of the Suns. What would be the price for her? If she behaves well, then she will have the same offer that Maduro had a month ago or a few weeks ago. Trump told Maduro, hand over power and go. And he didn't want, so he was captured. So Delcy has the same threat over her neck. Either she dismantles the cartel of the Suns and hands in power, and then she can go and live in Russia or Turkey or Qatar, or she will be put in jail too. She will be captured.
Maduro was supposedly offered to escape to Turkey. But if I return to Delcy Rodriguez, her statements in front of cameras in Venezuela right now in these days, I mean, she remains faithful to the regime and to Maduro. She said many times the United States should release Nicolas Maduro right now.
Yeah, this is what you call a theater. She must talk to the inside of her public, her supporters, and saying, yeah, I'm still in charge. But no, she's not in charge anymore. Mm-hmm. After what happened with Maduro, the Chavistas are all afraid. So for Maria Corina Machado to return, first, the danger must be dismantled. Then there will be new elections probably, and most probably she will win.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Pena Esclusa, you predicted the fall of 7 left-wing presidents in the last 2 years, and South America indeed began shifting back to the right. Was Javier Milei of Argentina the trigger? And if so, why?
Well, he was part of the trigger, but the real trigger was the access of Donald Trump to the White House. Donald Trump represents a new era that, combined with the fact that the Sao Paulo Forum cheated the Latin American population, so with the years, people said that they were not doing good. They only discourse, but at the hour of governing, they were doing it very bad. And also because it was obvious the relation of the Sao Paulo Forum to organized crime, people started to vote against them. You said correctly that I predicted this. I wrote an article, a report, saying that in several elections, Bolivia, Chile, Honduras, Costa Rica, Peru, Colombia, and Brazil, the left would be defeated. Also, there was the middle term elections in Argentina. So I think that Javier Milei, José Antonio Cast in Chile, Daniel Noboa, they are all the future of Latin America, working together with a right-wing point of view in order to recover democracy in the region and start a prosperous economic model.
Yeah, in Chile they just elected a right-wing president, even though the current president, Boric, could not run again because of the constitution. We should probably say that. Yeah,
he could not run again, but José Antonio Cast ran against the communist candidate, and he won. He won by far.
If we return to Javier Milei, Argentina is another country that after Second World War was among the richest in the world. Juan Perón then came to power despite the country's long decline in the following decades. Two juntas, Peronists still play an important role in their parliament today. How is that possible?
Well, it's historical, it's traditional, but I believe the future in Latin America, it's all either libertarian or conservative, or a combination of both. That is right-wing. In this very moment, what the expression of Peronism called Kirchnerism regarding to Nestor Kirchner and wife Cristina is in downhill, because she's in prison, in his house prison, because she's corrupt, as is corrupt Rafael Correa from Ecuador, member of the Sao Paulo Forum, as is corrupt Pedro Castillo, who is in jail in Peru, and other members of the Sao Paulo Forum. So I believe that the future, together with Donald Trump in the United States, and right-wing governments in Europe, because Europe is also changing. Europe is turning to the right because people do not want anymore this left-wing socialist ideology, like illegal migration, like gender ideology, like abortion, like destruction of the Christian values. So people is turning to the right, shifting to the right in Latin America, in the United States, and also in Europe, and I hope very soon in Slovenia.
You were a friend of Janez Janša, as you said, and you had a chance to get to know Slovenian politics.
Yes.
What has surprised you the most about Slovenian politics?
Well, something that has happened not only in Slovenia, but also in other countries that belong to the Iron Curtain. That the population maybe forgot the suffering they had when the Soviet domination, and they decided to vote for some left-wing governments that always do harm to the countries. They speak a lot, but the concrete action is very bad for the country. The right is the opposite. They speak little, but they do a lot. I hope that now in Slovenia and in other countries, they realize that it's important to shift to right-wing governments to protect industry, private property, the values of the West, especially Christian values, to return to prosperity, to the culture that characterizes the Western Hemisphere. Because let me tell you this, and this is my book about cultural warfare, left is not only related to destruction of democracy and authoritarianism. It's also relation to a culture that is contrary to Christianity. This is important because this kind of culture destroys more the countries, even more than weapons or dictatorship.
In Slovenia, the political left tends to stay in power through new faces that are constantly introduced and successfully sold to the voters. How do you interpret this kind of pattern? Very interesting, quite kind of unique for Slovenia.
Well, it happens in other countries too, and this is what it's called electoral engineering. The left is very intelligent, very astute in trying to promote things through fake news, through now social media. They are experts creating new emotions, new perceptions in order to cheat, to defeat, to somehow present to the population false narratives. Mm-hmm. So it's important that the right-wing parties and government understand that even though the left has not the power and has not the support, they use certain instruments to present themselves as bigger, as more important, because they use the, let's say, this idea of how powerful they are through the use of social networks and propaganda and the Ministry of Education and certain media.
Mm-hmm. Milan Kučan, you're probably familiar with this name. He was the last communist leader, the first president of independent Slovenia, and he founded his own forum in 2004 called Forum 21. Can you compare this engineering to the Forum Sao Paulo?
Some people have done that. I think that the case of the Sao Paulo Forum is unique because it's a criminal organization, directly criminal. See, when the Sao Paulo Forum was founded in 1990, attended two terrorist groups related to drugs. The Colombian guerrilla, FARC, the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces, and the ELN, the Army of National Liberation. They were guerrilla, they were terrorists, they were related to Cuba, and they were related to cocaine. So from the beginning, the Sao Paulo Forum was born as a criminal organization. So that's a unique situation that we experimented in Latin America. And now that crime is exported to other countries. To that crime of drug and terrorism was added other crimes like electoral frauds. And the Slovenian people must be very aware that they might be victims of an electoral fraud.
Mm-hmm. You were a writer, but then in the 90s you founded NGO, Fuerza Solidaria.
Yes.
What was the moment or the problem that pushed you from commenting on politics to build an organization?
Well, I've always been a writer, and I've always, after I left the private enterprise, I've always been related into politics, trying to help my country. Because, you see, I have this, I don't know if to call it a gift or a curse, which is a capacity of anticipating things that are going to happen. Mm-hmm. For me, it has happened many times in my life. Mm-hmm. So I anticipated before Chavez came to power that someone like him would take power, would exit power in my country. Mm-hmm. So when that happened, I thought it was my duty to defend my country against that evil. I tried, but at the beginning people did not want to hear anything. They just want to change, not understanding that they were going into an abyss, a precipice. But now, after the experience of what we had in Venezuela, now everybody understands that the Sao Paulo Forum and that socialism, especially that related to Cuba, is a venom, is evil and is destruction. I hope now we can build in Venezuela a conservative movement that will make sure that in the future we will always defend our values and our democracy.
You mentioned Cuban regime many times during this interview.
Yes.
What do you predict for the Cuban regime in the near future?
I think it's very much affected by what happened to Nicolás Maduro, because Cuba has had two very difficult moments. First, when the Soviet Union fell and didn't receive any more support. This is called, as you know, the special period. And then when Chavez died, because Chavez was substituting the help that Cuba received from Russia, from the Soviet Union, was coming from Venezuela. But then Maduro assured the continuity of the support. Now that Maduro has been captured and that Cubans are starting to leave Venezuela, after that happened, after the killing of these 32 bodyguards, Cuban bodyguards, the Cuban regime decided to take back to Cuba what the assets they have there. And now that Donald Trump and Marco Rubio are in control for a certain period of time of the Venezuelan oil, Cuba will not receive help from Venezuela, and that might mean the end of the Cuban regime without firing a single bullet.
Would you like to return to Venezuela and maybe even get involved back into politics?
I would like to return to Venezuela for sure, and I would like to continue to be helpful or to help my country. I don't know exactly in what terms. I don't know if having a public post or being an advisor to the new government, any of that would work, because I think that during my I don't look old, but I'm 71 years old, so I have certain experience that I want to put at the service of my country. Maybe the country should be run by younger people, but I think I can be of help.
The destruction of Venezuela is heavy. It was quarter of century under Chavismo, and the country is destroyed. Infrastructure results. People barely survive. 90% of the population live in poverty. So my question is, how long will it take for Venezuela to recover, at least a little bit?
Well, I think that the recovery already started, because you see, the recovery starts first in the head and then in the real world. When people is optimistic, they see, wow, Maduro is not here anymore. We're happy for that. So this optimism starts pushing other things like investments. I'm sure that private entrepreneurs will now be willing to invest, but while Maduro was there, they were not willing. So this optimism, that means the capture of Maduro, will be the first thing to happen. Then the United States has announced that with around the 30 to 50 million barrels that they will extract from Venezuela, they will devote that to start the reconstruction of Venezuela. You see, I'm not worried about this alliance with the United States, because we Venezuelans always have had it. In the past, many decades ago, it was the American oil companies that developed the Venezuelan industry, oil industry. So we've been working together with the United States for decades. Only this brief period of Chavez and Maduro was broken the relation. But now we're returning to the old alliance we've always had. So I think that now, with the capacity of producing oil and other minerals, rare minerals including titanium and other things, I think Venezuela has the potential to become, as Maria Corina Machado has said, the hub for the energy of the whole hemisphere and for development and progress. I think that already started.
Slovenian parliamentary elections take place in late March. What do you hear from your friend Janez Janša? What are his predictions? Currently in Slovenia we have probably the most radical left government in power in the last 4 years.
Even though I arrived yesterday, I haven't seen him. I hope to see him today, and maybe he will like to tell me about these things of how's the situation in Slovenia. But I would say to the Slovenian voters this: please look yourself in the mirror of Venezuela. We voted for the left, and then we entered a situation where we cannot get out. And at the end, we had to be liberated from an armed forces of other countries. Slovenian people had the experience of being dominated by the Soviet Union. So I think that the combination of that personal experience plus the Venezuelan experience, it would be an incentive to vote and vote massively for a person like Janez Janša and to make sure that Slovenia starts a process of progress and development.
Mr. Alejandro Pena Esclusa, thank you for your visit. Thank you for your time and your interesting answers.
Well, thank you for your interesting questions. It's my pleasure to be here. I love Slovenia.
Thank you. Vam pa, spoštovane gledalke, spoštovani gledalci, hvala za pozornost. To je bila Vroča tema. Vidimo se prihodnji teden.